Welcome to this episode of the Nonsensical Knowledge Podcast. I'm here with Dennis Stone of America's Stonehenge. Dennis, how are you?
I'm doing good tonight, Edwin. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much for being on, man, and thank you so much for the gracious invite you gave us to come out and check out all the historical work that actually took place out there this past weekend.
No, I'm so happy to have you come out and be with us. And I guess about a month ago you were out too, so it was very nice to see you again.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. I actually am very intrigued by the place. How did you first get involved with America's Stonehenge?
Yeah, when it goes back, it's actually in a kind of a family affair. It goes back about 65 years to 1955, and it was my dad, Robert Stone, and he heard about this on a radio show, much like we're doing right now. And it was a show out of Boston, one of the largest radio stations in New England. I guess it still is. It was on a Friday night, and they were just having a talk session about some local things. And what came up that particular evening was all about what we call America's Stonehenge today. These strange stone ruins located in southern New Hampshire in the town of North Salem. And my dad only lived about 7 miles away in the town of Derry, New Hampshire, and he lived there most of his life. And he had never heard about this place, so that it was quite a surprise to hear about a collection of stone ruins in the neighboring town.
Absolutely.
Kind of a big site, covers about 110 acres. And that week after he heard that radio show, which really intrigued him, and the name of the show is Yankee Yarns, by the way. Alton Hall Blackington was a talk show host. And I believe that summer they actually had another show about this, which he caught, so it was on twice that year. About a couple of days later, he was at a barber shop up in Derry, New Hampshire, waiting to have his hair cut. As he waited, he saw a couple of papers on the table, and he picked up one of them. It was a magazine called New Hampshire Profile. And as he's flipping through it, he notices, the pictures of this these stone ruins, and sees the headline and everything about, North Salem, New Hampshire and everything. It was quite a surprise for him, because there it was, another whole feature the same week about the same stone site.
Wow, and, that's amazing.
Yeah, as he's reading it, he asked the barber if he could keep it, and the barber goes, well, how old is that magazine? And my dad goes, well, it's 1952, so it was sitting in the barber shop 3 years, so just coincidentally, nobody had thrown it away.
Wow.
He took it home with him, and that Saturday night, they went to my aunt and uncle's house in the same town of Derry, and they were playing cards with about 10 people. So, they sat around having a beer, drinking cards, and my dad pulled out the magazine at some point and passed it around to about the 10 people that were there, the other 9 people, and they all looked at it. Nobody really knew what it was until my aunt and uncle on my mom's side, it was her sister actually and her husband, that looked at it and said, gosh, it looks familiar. Turns out they had actually driven their bicycles about 8 miles down the road back in the 1930s, 20 years prior to this when they were dating, and they had gone up there and picnicked on this site.
Wow, what are the odds?
Yeah, so it's kind of a family thing connected with it. And so my dad's next question is, hey, can you find the place, to my aunt and uncle? And they were like, well, it's been 20 years, I don't know. And it wasn't open to the public at the time. It was actually being researched by a group called the Early Sites Research, what was it called? The Early Sites Foundation, which was formed in 1954, the year before, and it ran until 1964. So that was the only thing really going on the site. It was not open to the public. There was no visitor center, no real trails. But they drove around that Sunday morning around North Salem, and they finally found what looked like the road that my aunt and uncle remembered. And the four of them hopped out of the car, and they walked about maybe a third of a mile up the hill. And they got to the site, and they said, oh, this is it. So my dad climbed into the chain link fence, which is still there today, and the rest of them stayed outside the chain link fence. The chain link fence surrounds about 1 acre of the what we call the main site, and there's barbed wire on top. It was put up in 1937 to protect the site.
That's the original fence? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. It's in incredible shape, actually, and it was Mr. Goodwin from Hartford, Connecticut, the first researcher that put it up in 1937, so almost 20 years later, they're climbing underneath there, or my dad was, and then he spent quite a bit of time inside, and there's a lot of brush and a lot of debris in the site at that time, so they lost track of where my dad was inside that 1 acre area, so the 3 of them stayed outside, and my dad wandered around the site. When he finally came back out snuck under the fence again. So he's basically trespassing, and there were signs up, not trespass, And most of the time, trespassing isn't good, but in this case, I guess it worked out.
Right.
And my dad came out pretty excited about the place, and my everybody said, "What do you think about the place?" And he said he was just totally blown away by the stone structures, the ruins, and it was so different from anything he had ever seen before or heard about. And it kind of lived up to what the radio show and the magazine, talked about. And he mentioned to my mom something about he'd like to open it up to the public, perhaps as a museum someday, and do research on it. And my mom wasn't, that excited about that. She said something about him having rocks in his head, So,
right.
So after that, it took 3 years for my dad to work with the owner, who was Malcolm Pearson. And Malcolm just died about 9 years ago at 99 years old, and he was the owner at the time. And so my dad worked out a deal with Malcolm over, 1958. My dad actually opened it to the public. I believe it was the summer solstice of 1958, and it was unofficial. On July 9th, officially it opened with a governor from New Hampshire coming down to be there. The last time a governor's actually visited our place, I think.
Wow.
So,
we should get back there.
It's been a while. Yeah. So we've been open 62 years, and it's still in the family. In 1970, it was made a state historic site. So 50 years ago this year was the anniversary of that. So it is a state historic site, but it's privately owned and operated. And it's about 110 acres of walls, constructions, and as you saw as you walked around, a lot of stone chambers and a lot of different features to the site.
Oh, it was amazing. There was so much to see there, Dennis. There's so much to take in, to be honest. And that's why I think multiple trips out there are very good, because it was really cool seeing it the second time around.
And we're still finding things there too on that 110 acres. So a lot of it's kind of hidden behind the forest, the vegetation, bushes, and the debris. So we're still finding things up there, and so it's been kind of, for me, I was about a year old at the time, so I'm sort of dating myself. So it's been pretty much my whole life. And our last name is Stone, so I guess that's kind of appropriate. But my dad passed away 10 years ago, and since he passed away, we found quite a few interesting things, particularly in the last 4 years since I retired from the airlines. I was with the airlines for 35 years, working full-time as a pilot. And then I would work on my days off at the museum, occasionally get away once in a while and take advantage of the airline, but travel and see other stone sites around the world,
Oh, for sure.
Never getting away from them, really. But
I mean, when you have a passion for them, Dennis, like you do, and it was purely evident. Everybody that we had spoken to had spoke about your passion about this place and other stone structures, and it was inspiring for sure.
Oh, thank you so much for the kind words. Yeah, I really appreciate that. The family really appreciates that too, and all the people that have worked here over the years. That's very nice for everybody too. Because I've taken my passion from them. It's kind of a passion. Pay it forward sort of thing. I got the passion of my dad, and he got passion from Malcolm. Malcolm got it from Goodwin, and it just goes back, for many, many years. And I have one son, one child, and we just had a grandchild on Friday, the day that you were there.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Wow.
Well, in the midst of that big day we had, and you were there for the activity.
Absolutely.
A pretty exciting day. Well,
yeah.
My daughter-in-law was due in 5 weeks, and that morning she had to be rushed to the hospital, and during the whole day I was kind of worried as to the condition of the baby and her. Pretty worried about it, as anybody would be.
For sure.
And we're still trying to make sure everything went smoothly up there, and we were also down by one staff member. That was my daughter-in-law. So we were on a short staff too on top of that, and everybody was really terrific. You guys are terrific. Everybody really helped out so nicely, and then at the end of the day at 4:33, the grandchild was born. So I just saw her about 20 minutes ago for the first time. She's been in the hospital.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so kind of an exciting weekend for us.
Yeah,
sure,
what a way to end that day. That was
it was good.
It was
I'll
really,
never forget.
Yeah, it was really cool. That was perfect timing. Like, I mean, and unfortunately with all the COVID rules, it's tough to be at the hospital these days. But I mean, that's a great day to me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we couldn't see her in the hospital or anything, but in fact, quite a few of the family members haven't seen the baby yet. Just because of the COVID, and it was unexpected too. She was expected, I believe. probably the third week of October. And the baby shower was supposed to be Sunday, yesterday. So everything got thrown out the window, basically.
Blown right through a loop, for sure. So what are some of the earliest? What's some of the the oldest carbon dating that you found on the site? Like, I know you were saying that you guys did carbon dating also. What was some of the earliest stuff you found?
Right, the carbon dating actually started in 1966, and 1967 they actually got a piece of root that was growing through a chamber, and the chamber has a very large slab fallen into it, and you probably saw it there. It's called the Chamber in Ruins. It has about 7,000. Yeah, it's pretty visual, and then it also has a roof, a lintel stone that weighs about 1,000 pounds. It's actually on the ground inside the chamber, with a roof slab falling on top of it. So at some point in time, possibly, it could have been hundreds of years ago, we don't know, the roof slab actually caved in, and it may have been due to an earthquake. We've had many, many earthquakes. The worst was that recorded was 1727, and it's in my dad's book how violent that earthquake was off of Cape Ann, probably about 20 miles to the east of where the museum is in the hill.
Oh, wow.
It caused damage all over New England and everything. Rivers ran backwards, sand came out of the ground, fires were started because people had, lanterns and stuff. But a lot of people went to church after that too, I guess, because it scared the heck out of everybody.
Oh, I can imagine.
But there were many aftershocks, and there was we have a printout in my file over at the museum. We have like a whole library upstairs and files and everything, and I've been going through all of them for the last couple of years since we retired, and we're going to digitize them. And I have a computer.
Put them on display for sure.
Yeah, and I think we might. We have actually a printout from the Harvard University from the geological department. It was 1995, and it went back 300 years of earthquakes in the area of magnitude and epicenter, and I have some more up to date, because we still have earthquakes here, obviously. But it does show you some of the violent earthquakes. So part of it does damage to the site. Besides trees falling on top of chambers and uprooting, and people too, people doing things there.
I know. That's tough too. We had seen some of the vandalism there, and it's so disappointing. People.
It is, and that's happening in a lot of places too, and we're very aware of that. We just came back from Chaco Canyon a year ago, and they're trying to teach people about the value of these ancient sites and to care and respect them, and that's what we're trying to do too. But there are just natural causes sometimes that cause damage to these, just age and all of that. But that chamber there had actually ended up on the north wall. We had 3 carbon datings, but the first one was in 67. And when Mr. Goodwin was there, he was from Hartford, Connecticut. He was involved in insurance, and his passion was the Vikings, Christopher Columbus, Native Americans, and he lived all over the country. His family was involved in insurance, and he lived in the West Coast in Seattle, in San Francisco. He was up in Alaska, actually doing some gold hunting. But he was the first cousin of J.P. Morgan. And,
wow.
So it was a pretty prominent family. He lived in Kansas at the beginning of his career. He was young. Then he moved westward to Seattle, then San Francisco. And he married his wife out in Seattle. Mary Hood was his wife. And then eventually moved back to Ohio for 15. I should say they moved to Ohio after that for 15 years. And what he would do on weekends is go out and map some of the 10,000 ancient mounds for the highway department. That was about 120 years ago he was doing that. But when he got back to Hartford, he had already heard about some of these, strange stone ruins and sites in the Northeast where he was from. He's starting to learn about these things, And he became aware of our site eventually. And then he bought 20 acres in 1937. And he put up that chain link fence and hired a crew to start working on the site, doing cleaning, a lot of cleanup, a lot of debris and everything, and particularly trees and brush and stuff like that, and then excavations. But he noted a pine stump, a white pine stump, and that was pretty big, good sized tree. It was pretty rotted, so they couldn't do tree ring dating or dendrochronology. But they could estimate its age by its state of decay and its diameter, and they estimated somewhere around 300 years old approximately. And this was in 1937, so to put it back into the 1600s. In 1967, the stump was gone by then, but we had photographs because Malcolm, the gentleman that I mentioned that my dad bought the property from, actually was the one that introduced Mr. Goodwin to the site. And Malcolm was from Massachusetts. Malcolm was a professional photographer, so he photographed from day one when they first visited in 1936, and when Goodwin began bought the 20 acres of property in 1937, and he photographed everything, which was great. It's a great photographic record of what went on before Goodwin and during Goodwin's, research and excavations and everything.
Oh, wow.
And there's a couple pictures of the stump there, it's pretty rotted,
Oh,
But
absolutely.
so they dug down in 1967, the New England Antiquities Research Association. And one of the members was the president of the Connecticut Archaeological Society, Frank Glenn, who'd been on the site since the 1950s. And he was a very well-respected archaeologist. And he actually excavated the area looking for pieces of the root from that pine tree. And what they were looking for is see if the pine tree roots had penetrated the chambered ruins in the north wall. And as they dug down, they actually found some of the roots, which was pretty, it was really exciting. They found them inside the wall, because you don't build a structure around the tree. The tree grows through the structure, the roots and everything. So they photographed that, they diagrammed it, they recorded all of that, and have all those archives and photographs, in our museum, in our file cabinets, and some of it's on display. And they dated that by radiocarbon dating the piece of root, and it dated to 1690 AD. So it showed that the site was there at a pretty early time period. It didn't say it was built in, but it was already sitting there with a tree growing through it.
Right.
Around 1690, plus or minus, I think it was 50 years. And that put it back before the Paddy family. And the Paddy family were 5 generations of shoemakers, originally from England. And some people gave them credit for building the entire complex of 110 acres of walls and structures and everything. And they said all his 6 husky sons helped him build it. He was eccentric. He was a bank robber, bootlegger, and mail robber. But actually, Paddy was a fifth generation shoemaker. There was a Peter from England, and then a Richard, Seth, and then Jonathan. And Jonathan at one point was a tax collector for the town of Salem around 1800 for 3 years. And later on, he took them to town paupers or poor people. He actually put a bid in with the town of Salem, and for about 8 years he took in town poor people. So people knew where Paddy family lived. They knew the Paddys. He wasn't hiding from the law as some of the legends, actually it's more mythology, had it. And he didn't have 6 husky sons. He actually had a son named Seth, and he had a son named Jonathan. And Jonathan is named after him. Died in Boston at about 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
The other son, so he had one son that lived, into adulthood. He had 4 daughters, and we think there's possibly 2 other daughters that don't have names, which might mean they died, as babies. So he had 5 daughters that lived. And so maybe the 5 husky daughters built the whole site.
Right, yeah, right.
Either sons or daughters. There's pretty heavy stonework up there to do that.
Well, that
so
was sorry to interrupt you, Dennis. But while we were up there, it was we thought about it up and down, man. There's so many big stones there that and stones that are on top of walls. Not even so much that they're like at the bottom of a base of a wall. They put the big stones on top. So
yeah,
it would take a lot of effort to build those structures, like a lot of effort.
And you can appreciate that by when you saw that the amount of work of in the height that they moved this. Yeah, they could have just easily, not so easily, but they could have moved the stones and left the heavy ones on the bottom, put the smaller ones on top of the heavy ones. But in some cases they put the big stones up higher, like you mentioned. So it's a lot of work, and for some reason we noticed that at not only our site, but there are other sites in the Northeast, maybe 800. And a site can be one chamber in a town, or it can be a town like North Stonehenge, Connecticut, with 8,000 features scattered over the 35,000 acres. And we do see that same kind of thing there, where they put big stones, sometimes on top of small stones. So they had to raise them up quite a way, and that's extra effort and more danger too, when you're building something. So yeah, there's a lot of heavy stonework there, and so that dating actually put it back before the Paddy family, and that was in 1967. So the date was 1690 AD, plus or minus so many years. 2 years later, in 1969, the year we went to the moon, landed on it, they actually got charcoal. They went down and they went through several inches of sterile soil, which was kind of a disappointment initially, And right. I think it was a 5 by 5 foot area right next to the north wall, right below where the piece of root was found. So they continued that area, digging. And eventually what they found was the soil colors changed, which they will do. We had the Munsell chart. You can match different stratigraphy of soil, you'll see it comes in layers according to how long it's been sitting in the ground, and you can actually match it up to other areas, kind of get an idea how old something is, by the level it's found at. Thomas Jefferson, some people consider the father of archaeology. He worked on some of the Native American mounds, and he mentioned that the law of stratigraphy is the lower you find something, as long as the soil has never been disturbed, the older it is. And so the lower you go, the older. And what we found was, when they got through that sterile soil, they found a hammerstone, rubbing stone, stone scrapers, and little stone spallings where somebody had been striking a big stone, knocking flakes off, and they were shaping what we call dressing the stone.
Oh, wow.
And it was definitely Stone Age technology, not metal tools, but stone tools against stone, hammer stones. And we found that, and then we also found charcoal scatter. And the charcoal was sent to Geochrome Laboratories in Cambridge, Mass., just like a piece of pine root was. And the results came back that this charcoal was about 2995 years before present, so about 3,000 years old, plus or minus. So it's like, wow.
Yeah, so the more evidence you find, it's going further and further back.
Yeah, exactly. And that was like adjacent to the north wall again, and there was no disturbance in the strata, the stratified soil. There was nothing that turned it over like a shovel or, chipmunks or people digging or whatever. It was all kind of undisturbed, which is good. That's what we want to find in archaeology.
Right.
And then 2 years later, in 1971, in that same area, they went down and they found some more stone tools. They also found more charcoal that dated to 4,000 years old, plus or minus, I think, 250 years. Below that, they found the bedrock had been removed. So the first thing that took place is the builders, whoever they were originally, removed the bedrock, used that material for building the structures, and they built a wall we call the North Chamber North Wall, which we've been talking about with a root crew through. And so the first thing that happens, you remove the bedrock, then the soil starts depositing there from windblown soil and windblown particles, and it builds up very slowly in minutes, about an inch for every 100 to 125 years. Some areas will collect soil quicker too. It's like a catch-all where stuff will wash in there and build up quicker.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in that north wall, we have three datings. The root, 1690, the 3,000-year-old charcoal, 4,000-year-old charcoal, and then the bedrock. So the bedrock had to be removed first, and then all this stuff came in later. And that chamber has two windows. We found out recently it's actually trapezoid floor plan, not rectangular. There's not 90-degree walls in there. And the corners, the three corners of the chamber, one corner is just part of the doorway, but three corners have corbelling. And corbelling's kind of a architectural design, almost looks like a arch, but it doesn't have a keystone.
Yep.
And you'll see it in some ancient Irish sites. You'll see it in other places in the world. I believe in Mexico, I've seen it down in the Yucatan.
Yeah, absolutely. We were actually speaking about that while we were there. Dan is an engineer. One of my brothers that I brought, and he was saying the same thing. He had pulled it up online, like, oh man, these look a lot like the ones in Ireland.
That's pretty cool that he saw that. That's pretty good. Yeah, pretty good observation. And that because that takes a while for many people to see that. That's cool that he picked it right up on that too.
He's a very analytical engineer, so
that's what you need. You make a great asset. Yeah, a great resource. Yeah, that's good.
So
it takes different fields, different disciplines to work on the site for sure, and that he would be handy on that for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Now, with all those dating techniques, tell me about surface luminescence dating and optically stimulated luminescence. What exactly are those? Because I know they were conducting those also Friday, right?
That's right. Yeah, they're doing the optically stimulated luminescence, and that's brand new to our site. We've never used that before. We used 12 carbon datings that I mentioned. And we also dated the site using astronomy back in the 1970s. The Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics did the calibration on the survey work and said that if your alignments were used for that purpose, to align, they would work about 1800 BC plus or minus a couple hundred years, just like the oldest carbon dating. So that was really the second way we dated the site. And that was 1978 results. In 1971, we got the 4,000-year-old charcoal. So all these years later, we're starting to date it using optically stimulated luminescence. I believe that's been around for a while, but they've really perfected that. And what they do is they actually date the dirt. What they're looking at is how long ago did the dirt see the light of day? And it's to do with radiation. So basically what they do is they do coring, and they core down into the ground next to a wall where there's dirt, and hopefully, again, it can't be disturbed, it can't be turned over.
It has to be fresh.
Fresh. You can't see, So if a chipmunk dug a hole and light could have gone down the hole, it'll actually affect the dating, so you have to be very, very careful about that. And if somebody went in there and excavated and then they threw the dirt back into the hole, well, they just destroyed the optically stimulated luminescent dating. You'll come up with a false reading. And I think it's very expensive. I understand it can cost thousands of dollars a core, or about $1,000 per core, I think, each core. So they use PVC pipe, or they use an aluminum pipe, and they just drive that right into the ground, and they try to get it as low as they can, next to a wall, or in this case, when you were there, it was on top of the roof of the structure of the chamber, the oracle chamber. And the idea is that the chamber had to be built first, and then the dirt was deposited after the construction,
Right.
So you can't mistake and say, well, that was just natural dirt. It has nothing to do with the construction. But in fact, the wall and the roof had to be built first, and then they may have sprinkled some soil over the top of the structure, and then you have that natural buildup. I think they call it pediogenesis. It's the creation of soil, again, from windblown soil and particle, coming out of the air, And so they took 4 cores on Friday. It took all day to do this process. We had a gentleman, a doctor from University of Washington, and his 2 assistants who were from Brookhaven National Laboratory down in New York. And plus we had members from the New England Antiquities Research Association. We had 2 state archaeologists from Concord, New Hampshire. We had our archaeologist who was a past president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society and her assistant. And then we had several other people there from different organizations that were actually, we had a geologist on staff too. He had a couple of master's degrees, so he was looking at the soils too and helping out wherever he could. But so they took 4 cores. They did 3 in the oracle chamber, and they did 1 on the wall in front of what we call the watch house. And they had to hammer those tubes into the ground and take out the dirt and carefully cover them with aluminum foil. And they did a lot of this inside of a tent. They call it like a dark room,
Oh yeah.
And then what they're going to do is send the soils off to the laboratory, and they left behind in each of the test holes a device that actually measures radioactivity for 1 year, and then they retrieve them. And I guess they have something I guess that gives them some information to help analyze the age of the dirt. And they shoot laser beams at the dirt. They have to do hydrochloric acid cleaning and all these there's all this chemical stuff they have to do, and then they shoot laser beams at it. It gives off a luminescence, and it tells them, again, when the last time that dirt saw the light of day. So you build a structure, soil builds up next to it after the structure. Sometime it could be hundreds of years after or dozens of years after. So the structure is going to be older than the date you get back.
Absolutely.
But how much older, I'm not sure, but they can kind of probably figure that out roughly,
What a cool process. that is such a cool process.
Yeah. Well, there's a chamber they just did, and it was a separate, because they chose 5 New England places, and the doctor flew in about a week and a half ago, and he's actually here for about 2 weeks before he goes back to Washington State. And there was one site in Pennsylvania. I think it's called the Oley Hill site. I haven't been to it. I've been to some sites in Pennsylvania, but I haven't been to that. And it was done in 2018 by, I think New England Antiquities was involved with it, but I don't believe Dr. Feather or any of the other people were on that particular project. The date just came back, though, after 2 years, and the median date that came back on that structure was 450 BC. So it's, instead of this structure being something built by farmers 200 or 300 years ago, it appears that it goes back before Columbus and before the time of Christ. So, that's been a big question. How old are these northeast sites? And they're starting to date them now,
And if, when they do date them, it changes a lot of things, right? It would change how a lot of people view these historic sites and how old they are and how old North America is, and So, yeah. Hopefully we can break through to mainstream science and and say, hey, look, these are all you were telling us about. There's a couple hundred in New York alone that we didn't even know about, and we live here. So it's
yeah, yeah, right in your backyard almost. I say Dutchess County, Putnam County, and Westchester County have you have about 200. If you go towards Monticello, Bethel, Woodstock, New York, into that area a little bit further, the numbers go up closer to 500 different sites of stone constructions, basically. And then in Danbury, Connecticut, and then if you had to cross to, like I mentioned, North Stonington, Connecticut, and Gunjawamp, some of these have been on TV on History Channel, some of these sites. My dad got into it, like I say, in 1955. I think they knew of about 15 sites in the Northeast. Our site, the Raymond, New Hampshire site, and the Upton Chamber, Gunjawamp down in Connecticut, and a couple other sites, that they knew about. But the numbers have gone up astronomically, and actually it's not just New England, it's from Quebec all the way down to the mid-Atlantic states, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and of course New York, your own backyard. Yeah. So these sites, it may be, we're finding the same stonework, by the way, Edwin, all the way out to the West Coast. Certain features, when you look at them, it's like, wow, is that a coincidence? But you find several of the same features that we have at our site and some of the other New England sites, 2,000 miles away in eastern Colorado, for instance, the same kind of stonework. And you're like, wow, one thing could be coincidence. Two of these features could be coincidence. 3, 4, 5, it's like,
right. It's too many. It's too many coincidences. And that's what's strange is do we have an idea of what culture may be responsible for, some of these structures, especially America's Stonehenge? Mm-hmm. Like, do we know what culture may have done it?
That's the $1 million question. Basically, there were 3 theories, and one of them is that, Farmer Patty built our site. Of course, I don't think he built all these other 800 sites across the Northeast either,
Oh, right.
If he did, he'd be a pretty well-known guy of building sites with his 5 husky daughters and his 1 son there.
That's a pretty eccentric guy.
Yeah, pretty eccentric. Yeah, very prolific. But finding them, like I say, we're finding the same thing in Mount Shasta, right around in California, right around there. The same kind of what we call serpentine walls, and there are chevron-shaped walls, and then there's walls that go from boulder to boulder to boulder, zigzagging. And other features that are the same as we're finding on the East Coast. So it's not just the Northeast or even maybe out to New York and Ohio, but it seems to go right across the country. In Alabama, too, there's a 40 square mile with a lot of these features down there, too. We're supposed to visit that twice this year. And a gentleman a doctor from actually Jacksonville State University in Alabama was supposed to meet me on campus and take my wife and I and go see some of these standing monoliths, cairns, serpentine walls, they call them rattlesnake walls down there, and some of the other features that are similar to ours. And of course, COVID-19 that kind of threw the monkey wrench into that. So we'll probably do it next year,
Oh, that'd be cool.
But Native American would be, another very good possibility. They were here for at least 10,000 years. Or the other one is Old World visitors, coming across the ocean before Columbus, before the Vikings. And that's the one we know Native Americans did an incredible amount of, building across the Americas. But in the Northeast, it wasn't known that they built stone constructions, but that may be incorrect. That may be, the wrong assumption. They may have been involved with this. But there are some features that still indicate Old World travels. There's inscriptions. There's some stone features on these structures that look identical. The size, the shape, the orientation, the core billing, and even measurements of these structures that seem to be the same as what's on the other side of the ocean in Western Europe. Standard unit of measure, for instance, called the megalithic yard, seems to be here. But the markings on stones from Maine all the way down to Brazil, all the way out to the West Coast, are different Old World inscriptions. And at our site, there are 3. There is Phoenician, Celtic, and Libyan, according to Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University. Whether he's correct or partially correct or incorrect, these markings are on the rocks, and it's a question of who did that. And they're, again, all across the country and all the way down to South America. And there are other, types of scripts, Semitic scripts found too, Proto-Hebrew and some others that have been found, again, in the Americas, and they shouldn't really be here. There's place names, mountains, rivers, valleys, and gorges throughout the Northeast that are the same, both in Native American, for the same meaning as it is in Gaelic, which is, Celtic, basically, like Lake Memphremagog, Cortacigi Gorge, Amisteg River, Merrimack River, and so forth, right across the landscape. That Dr. Barry Fell has list upon list upon list, not just a couple coincidences, but not only the word itself, but what the word means, Merrimack River, Merrimack has a certain meaning behind it. Amoskeag has a certain meaning. Cortakichi, has a meaning, and Mount Monadnock and so forth. These are all words with meanings behind them, but they're the same in Native American as it is in Gaelic on both sides of the ocean. So he felt there was a connection in the oceans, again, like many people think the oceans were used as highways, not as barriers. And but the first official visitors would be the Vikings, about 1,000 years ago. That's recognized today. And that's about it. Then Columbus comes along. But we think that there were other people coming across the Pacific as well as across the Atlantic into the Americas. And there seems to be so much evidence supporting that, And it's not to take anything away from the Native Americans. In fact, the Cherokees say their ancestors came across what we call the Atlantic Ocean today. So, some of the legends or oral tradition of Native Americans talk about this. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, so who built our site is still a question, but the Phoenician writing, the Libyan and Celtic script, according to Barry Felt, and three of those, actually three different inscriptions were found in that chamber in ruins. So we got 3 carbon datings out of there. We found 3 stones, 2, I believe, in 1967, and the third one in 1969. I might have that backwards. It may have been 1 in 67, 2 in 69. But those are the ones that sat in the building for several years. And Dr. Barry Felt came along in 1975, and he identified him as the Phoenician living in Celtic script, according to him. So,
wow, that's amazing. That's just to have even a trace of, like, we were looking at the inscription inside of. I don't want to misquote it, but it's in the Oracle chamber, right? There's a what is it? I don't want to say gazelle. I know I'm quoting. I'm saying it wrong. But in any event, the inscription inside of the tomb was super cool to see. It's like that's and to see they couldn't date that. They couldn't date like the inscriptions, like, or they were just like carbon date them. Like, that's not possible, or
right? Yeah, you can't date stone. You have to have something organic. That was one time for carbon dating. There are lichen tests. Actually, I found through our records back in the early '60s, we actually submitted lichens off rock. Because if you quarry a stone, you have a fresh cut on that stone, a fresh edge,
Right.
And we had that when the site was built, possibly thousands of years ago. So they must have taken a surface that they knew was quarried thousands of years ago. They took the samples of lichens and they sent it to a laboratory. I'm going to say in Miami. I actually have the records, and I was quite surprised because people have talked about that even more recently. However, it wasn't the right type. There was 2 different things set, 2 types of lichens. And neither one of them were candidates for this testing method. And like, oh, darn, it has to be a certain type of lichen because it grows so slowly on the rock surface. So if you cut a rock, say, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago when the site was built, then, this will grow on it very, very slowly. The patina will get on the rock, it'll start aging and everything. And they can scrape that. But if you had a carving there, too, if you had made a carving and that had some patina in it and some of the lichens, they could say, okay, the carving is first, and this stuff grew afterwards, so we can at least give you a minminum date.
Right.
But they didn't have the right type of lichens, and maybe that's still a possibility in the future. But they did during this OSL testing the other day when you were there. You can actually again not only do it, but you can look at the back of the rock. Say the rock. There's a rock in the Oracle chamber. The back of it's against the soil, and it hasn't seen the light of day either. Since it was built.
Right.
They actually took some rocks and they actually were submitting some of that too for the back side of the rock. They had to make sure they identified it and everything. And again, it had to be all done in dark room. They had I don't know if you remember, they put
tarps. Tarps all over. There were coats, there were tarps, there were sweatshirts. Tried to get all the light out of there for sure. Absolutely.
Everything came out to cover it, I know.
It was a super cool process. I loved being a part of it. So what bones have you found on the site?
Yeah, so they have found some bones on the site. Let's see. On the main site, 3 bones were found by Mr. Gudrun sometime about 1938, and they were on display in our building starting in around 1958 when we opened up. And in 1968, they were sent to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. And a Dr. Lucille, I think her name is Hoyen, I believe her name was. We have the name down in our files. And she was a doctor of physical anthropology at the Smithsonian, and she looked at the bones, actually a couple of different bones, but 3 of the bones that came out of the main site. And she identified those as human. She said they were quite denser than she thought a human bone would be, but she also, I guess there were some markings on the bones too, and these little, like, scratches, kind of deep scratches in the bones, were made while the bone was still alive, the person was still alive, you know?
Oh, wow.
And
like like surgery or like a...
well, it brings up a lot of interesting opinions and theories and ideas, because we have this big table there, you know, the sacrificial table, so it brings that up pretty quickly, you know, to the conversation. I don't know, you know, it'd be, you'd be guessing, I guess, but it's interesting that it was human, because usually bones in New England will last a few centuries and then they decompose because of the acidity in the soil. In certain cases, they will survive, though. I get the New Hampshire Archaeological Society publications. My dad was a member, you know, well over 50 years ago. In fact, I used to participate in some of the excavations back then. But they do find bones in New Hampshire occasionally, going back a few thousand years. So it's not, you know, unheard of. But these bones were in the site. They may have been protected by some of the stone structures. I think they came out of the east, near the east-west chamber, which is in the center of the site, the plaza area. Now, they sat in a building for many years, and they ended up in Washington. She examined them, and because they were out of the ground at that point over 30 years, you couldn't do any radiocarbon dating. And radiocarbon dating actually started in 1950 with Dr. Libby. And so when the bones were found 12 years before that, back in 1938, you know, you couldn't carbon date them. There was no such thing at that point. So once they became exposed and they were just sitting around, you can no longer carbon date them. Just like the OSL, you have to protect it from the elements, from light. You have to contain it in aluminum foil immediately, and then get it to a laboratory as quick as you can. And you try to keep it in the same moisture as you brought it out of the ground, which is not always possible too. But you have to protect it from sunlight and everything.
It's unfortunate.
So when we get charcoal, we have to wrap it up and then send it to a lab. Well, they had these bones sitting there, and they can be carbon dated, of course, and they were just sitting there. And it's no longer, without technology today, possible to carbon date it. Maybe in the future there'll be some ways, but what we could do, we think, is use DNA on them. I've been talking to people about that, because you can DNA bones going back, you know, way back. I mean, you know, I'm thinking they're going back, somebody can correct me on that, even millions of years. I think you can, as long as the DNA survives, you know.
Absolutely.
At least hundreds of thousands of years. But these bones may only be, you know, they could be a few hundred years old, they could be a few thousand years old.
It would still be cool to know when, you know, it'd still be an idea of when this person existed and why it was there, you know.
Yeah, and who they were, you know. It might give you a little idea of who these people were. Yeah. So there are 3 bones. And this year, when I started I'm going through all my dad's, you know, he's got files, 100 years worth of files. He's got files before he was even born that were, you know, about the time he was a kid, I guess, of the site, with Mr. Goodwin and some people even before that. So I was looking, and I found a couple of different files about these bones. I'm like, God, I had heard something about this years ago, you know, but here it is. And then I went into our museum. I'm looking around at all the different, you know, pieces of artifact we have in there, and I identified 2 of the bones. I'm like, these are the 2 bones. And I had seen them for years, and I didn't put them together with, you know, what went to the Smithsonian. The third one, however, one piece looks like it's missing the end on it. I'm wondering if somebody had actually taken a piece of it and sent it off for some sort of analysis at one point, maybe back in '68 or something. So I'm still looking for the file on that. But we do have 2 of the 3 bones, and I think we have all 3 bones, and maybe DNA could be done. And she also looked at a couple other bones. One of them she identified as bison or buffalo. And she was kind of surprised. She didn't tell I think it was a gentleman, in this case, her colleague, that where it came from. And she said she had him look at it for a second opinion, and it looks like it's bison. And then she told him where it was from, and he says, oh, wow. He goes, but you know what? If you go back in time, the bison probably were in the New Hampshire, New England area. So that was found near the watch house, which you probably remember the watch house. That's where we get some of the OSL testing at the end of the day. That's where we're working. Yeah.
Yeah, it's right at the beginning of the site. It looks like it literally looks like a watchtower. Or not a tower, but it looks like a place where you watch everything coming up or off the hill, you know.
That's what we've always kind of thought. Exactly what you said there. Yeah. And it's right at the beginning of the tour, you know. And two other bones found in there too, and they look like they might have been from a wild boar or pig. Now, Paddy, he would have had some domesticated animals, even though he was a shoemaker, a tax collector, and helped with the paupers, taking in the paupers for 8 years. You know, he got paid each year. He put out a bid for the poor people to stay with him. He was one of the poor farms in Salem until 1837. That was the last year he did that. So he might have had, you know, some animals that got down there and perhaps some teeth. I don't know what happened, but, you know, there's some teeth in that chamber. And we also found a little bone in there that has a drill hole in it. So it's probably a pendant that was found in the watch house, along with a stone that's very small, flat, and triangular. It looks like a piece of slate, actually. I think our archaeologist could identify it because her husband was a doctor of geology. But it had a hole through it, too. So we had like two pendants found in the watch house. She didn't look at the bone pendant back in '68, but she did look at the two other bones that might be wild pig or boar, but they weren't really settled on that. You know, her, and I guess she showed it to some of her colleagues, so there's a couple of there that they weren't really sure what they were. It was more of a guess. So we have found bones on the hilltop, 3 possible human bones, and then buffalo, and then possible pig teeth, I guess they were, and then a little stone pendant and a bone pendant. So, wow, but that's about it so far in bones, because they don't last long in the soil up there.
Oh, for sure. It's just super intriguing that you had found some, and that, you know, and bison too, it would have to be pretty far back that they had them in New Hampshire, correct? Like, they have to be quite a few years, you know?
Yeah, it would be a long time, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Probably well before, you know, European occupation, you know, way back before. Yeah.
When were sorry to interrupt you. When were the stone chambers built and the alignment stones put in place?
Right. So we began to work on the astronomical alignments back in 1965, and it was a CBS special that came on TV. And then, you know, back in the days of 3 networks and NET TV, which is PBS today. So they had a special, and it was called Mystery of Stonehenge on CBS. And you can still, I guess, get that on YouTube. You know, it's available. I saw it at the National New Hampshire Library back in the 70s, 10 years after it first aired, with a bunch of workers. Our staff went over there, and we had now you can just pick up your smartphone and watch it, you know. So the reason for that special was a book by Gerald Hopkins. He's from England originally, but he was at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Mass., and I believe I'm going to say Boston University. I get BC and BU mixed up sometimes, but he was a professor of astronomy. He wrote the book Stonehenge Decoded, which became a top seller, you know, a big hit. And he, in his book, basically said Stonehenge was a computer. Not only could you, you know, you had the 4 seasons, you know, especially the solstices, but also the equinoxes. But it also would mark the lunar alignments too, the 18.5-year lunar alignments, and the cross quarter days, I believe. But if you could track the moon, the lunar alignments, very carefully, he said you could actually predict eclipses, you know. And if you could predict eclipses, you'd have as a priest, astronomer, or whatever, you know, one of the hierarchy in the group of, you know, the civilization there, you could control a lot of people with that, you know. Especially a solar eclipse or something, you know, they would have been, praying in front of you, you know, that kind of thing, and giving you a lot of respect for that, you know. So that book came out, the TV show was made, and because my dad and a lot of the members of the New England Antiquities Research Association and other people saw that, we were well aware that around the main site, out in the woods, were these monoliths. These are big stones that are shaped like arrowheads just out in the middle of the woods. And even Mr. Goodwin knew about it back in the 1930s and 40s. But his concentration, of course, is where that 1 acre, you know, where the chain link fence is located, and the watch house. Those two things he really focused on. But so back in '67, we decided to open up one of the stones, and they actually had to clear about 800 feet of trees, a great big swath through the woods from the main site to the southwest direction. And we felt that stone monolith might be a winter solstice sunset. Back in those days, you couldn't even see a sunrise or a sunset at our site because the woods surrounded the hilltop, you know. It was just pretty dense forest. So they opened it up in '67, and we patiently waited on the winter solstice, but the weather didn't cooperate, and it didn't in '68 or '69. But 50 years ago, this coming winter, my dad and I, we still lived up in Derry, New Hampshire. We came down with our neighbor from up there, and we met our manager, who lived in a house abutting our property. And the four of us went up, and he had built a wooden snowmobile out of parts. He was a very smart gentleman, and he ended up being a nuclear physicist, but he was very creative. And he built the snowmobile, and then we used it. We used it to break the trail about a third of a mile through the trails up to the site, and there's about a foot of snow. So we went up there on December 20th, 1970, and we stood there watching and waiting and hoping the clouds wouldn't ruin it for us. And towards the evening, just before sunset, it was just almost a perfect sky with a couple little clouds and the sunset right over the top of the stone. And, we were all just amazed by the sight of that,
Wow, what a discovery, What a discovery. What a way to witness it.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. We didn't, I guess we all felt the same time. Maybe we're the first people to see this since the last, the original builders, perhaps. So it was kind of not only cold, we got chills, but we got chills because of that too. And we took pictures. My dad took a whole sequence of slides, and there's a painting in the museum today. Before you go out the back door, on the right side, when you visit us, you'll see a painting on the wall, and it is of that 1970 very first time seeing the sunset or sunrise. It was a sunset in this case. And so we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of that. But that really speeded up the interest and the work and research on the astronomical alignments. So right after that, we began clearing out some of the other avenues to these monoliths. And by 1973, we realized we were going to have to get a survey of this site, an accurate survey done by a professional surveyor. So we hired Beverly Pearson Associates of Derry, New Hampshire, and he was the president of the New England Surveyors Association. And his son was also a surveyor, part of the survey company. His name was Charlie Pearson. He came down. We hired him, and he began his survey work on the site. And he did it kind of we couldn't pay him to do the whole thing at once. So as we raised money, we'd have him come in and he'd spend a day or two or three surveying with his team, and then he would leave, go through and crunch the numbers, give us some data, and then he'd come back when we had more money. So we did that over the course of 5 years to 1977. In the meantime, my uncle Oz, he was a very smart individual. He was working on the site on the astronomy too, and we got our own transit, we got our own stadia rod and a pseudo compass. And he went out and did some of his own calculations. And then there was a third gentleman from Vermont who was an engineer too, and he was an astronomer, an amateur astronomer. And he built his own telescopes and equilateral, what did they call it? He had his own equilateral telescope, I guess it was. So it was something pretty cool that he designed. He built his own telescopes too. He worked for a guy named Bell up in Canada. They were launching satellites by Canon into space,
Wow.
And then he ended up working in Bedford, Massachusetts at the Air Force Laboratory. But so he did it. So it was the surveyor, and then my Uncle Oz for the team, and then there was a gentleman from Vermont who was working on some Vermont sites up in Woodstock, Royalton, Putney, Vermont, where there's some of these stone chambers that Astronomical are on. But he came down into New Hampshire to our site, and he spent quite a bit of time independently doing his own survey on the standing stones. And in the end, when they compared all the notes, they agreed with one another, kind of a cross-check. But so Charlie Pearson's work, though, however, in 1977, we took because he was a professional, we sent all his data to the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And in 78, we got the results back that if these were used for astronomical purposes, they would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus a few hundred years due to the Earth's tilt. So that was really very encouraging. It agreed with the 1971 carbon dating, the 4,000-year-old one I mentioned. And what they said, too, is we have 24 alignments with the sun and moon, but you have 25 alignments for the stars. And we only knew that we had the true north alignment with Polaris, which is a pole star today.
Yep.
But we weren't really aware of the other points that he surveyed might be alignments for the other stars, like Sirius and some of the other bright stars, And so that was really exciting news, and that was in 1978. And we're actually today still working on this. Over 40 years later since the results, we're still doing work on the astronomy. And today we think we have 51 alignments for the sun, moon, and stars. And we also have alignments, constellation like Draco, the dragon. It's one of the 88 constellations. And 4,000 years ago, one of its stars, which is Alpha Draconis or Thuban, was the pole star. It was not Polaris. So in the evening, it would have been looking up at the pole star or Thuban. It would have been its body would have been Draco, and it would have been spinning around it very slowly during the course of the evening. And that's a star that the Egyptians would have been looking at, and they thought that was a gateway to heaven. Like, other cultures had their own idea of what that star doesn't move. It's an important star. Everything is circumpolar or rising and setting stars, but this star does not move. And they had different names for it, but they thought that might be the gateway to heaven. So Draco would have been a focus back then. It would have been a focal point back thousands of years ago. And Draco, we think, inspired some of the serpent wall building at our site. So we have
I was sorry to interrupt you. I was going to ask because when we were there, you had pointed out the Ouroboros to us. And how long did you say it was? 2,550 feet, I believe.
Good memory. Yeah, that's right on the money.
yeah. Because like when we on our way out, we noticed it on our way in, but after we had spoken to you and you were saying our goodbyes, we had stopped on the way back, and that thing looks like a giant serpent head.
Doesn't it really? It looks like it's going to come after you. I mean, we've been walking by it for decades, and people before that. But one thing was there were a lot more woods and brush there. I've been cleaning, particularly since I retired 4 years. A lot of cleaning with hedge trimmer, chainsaws, and and just thinning it out so you can actually see that. But when we got LiDAR in this year for the very first time, handheld LiDAR, I should say, because we've had LiDAR pictures of the site from 2011. I believe the U.S. was completely LiDAR starting in over 10 years ago, and they just finished it, I think, in 2018 across the nation. So we have great big blown-up pictures of our site, of our hilltop with LiDAR from around, I'd say about 9 years ago. And it's pretty cool, but it's pretty blurry, and you can see the walls, but you can't make out any details because the resolution isn't very good. It's airborne from a plane. Then they use drones, but this gentleman has the handheld, and they've only had that out for about less than 2 years. And he's from Connecticut. His name is Tom Elmore, and he has his company, GeoNav, out of Suffield, Connecticut. And he's been told he's the only one using that for this type of work, using it on ancient sites, and he's one of the only ones right now that has the device, I guess, on the East Coast, although I'm sure they're starting to sell them. But he approached me back in, I think, late February to see if we'd be interested in having him doing some LiDAR scanning of our site. And I almost, jumped out of my seat because I had just done a radio show and with a gentleman on the West Coast. He's pretty well known. And he said, you got to get LiDAR of your site, some really good resolution. You got to get GPR there. And so when this guy called me up about 2 weeks after that show was on, I'm like, wow. And not only does he have LiDAR, but he's got a friend from Waltham, Mass, who has a ground penetration radar, and she has this GPS pole that costs like $16,000. She can do very, very accurate, GPS measurements with it. So we started doing scanning in May, and what we're doing is 15 acres of the 110 acres that contain the astronomical alignments, which we started surveying in 1973. And I believe he said he's put in about 600 hours worth of work scanning and then processing all the data. His LiDAR will put out 300,000 points per second, and each square meter will get about 150,000 points, which the resolution can be down to about 1 centimeter.
So the drone LiDAR, amazing resolution. Right.
The resolution's incredible, yeah. And he said the drone LiDAR, the drone is very good too, but he said that puts out, at least as about 2 or 3 months ago, that put out about 400 to 800 points per square meter compared to 150,000. And airborne LiDAR, which is probably improving too as we speak, was around 4 to 8 points per square meter. That's why we had such blurry pictures, from 2011. And so we might be able to use his scanning is down to a centimeter. We're probably going to not only have incredible imaging of the walls and structures and everything. And on the computer, you can look underneath the structure, looking up. You can look down as if you're in a plane looking down, even though it's handheld. And it's all 3D. It has a high-definition camera, so it blends out with the LiDAR. The unit has 16 lasers on it that shoot out 80 meters. as he's walking. And he bought a supercomputer to try to process this, but it's still, he spent months processing it, like I say, about 600 hours. And, so we might be able to find a standard unit of measure, because one of the questions about the site that came up in the 1930s by Mr. Goodwin's right-hand man, his supervisor on the project at our museum, was a guy named Roscoe Whitney from Evanston, Massachusetts. He was an MIT engineer, and he did some beautiful drawings of the site. He used a plane table, so he did cross-section, profile, and plan view, all to scale of our site. Very, very accurate, which is great. We still have all that data today. But he mentions, he goes, whoever built this site either didn't know about or give a damn about linear measurements, because I've measured these structures, the width, height, and length. Because they didn't know about linear measurements, didn't give a damn about them. I looked at imperial measurements of inches, feet, yards, and I guess the old rod. Because this site does not conform to that. So if the patty's built it, you think you'd find things, made in inches or feet or whatever, and it doesn't conform.
Like the standard measurement of the time, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And it does not, and not only that, but we're finding that the structures weren't even 90-degree corners, finding trapezoid shapes to that chamber ruins, the groove on the sacrificial table. The top of it is about 9 inches narrower of the big, it looks like a rectangular groove. It's trapezoid in shape, and we only found that out 4 years ago. And we've been there for how many years, It's like, oops, kind of embarrassing, in a way. But
for the technology that they had in the 70s, it's quite a bit different than it is like today.
It's like magic today. The stuff we get today would look like magic. The computers, even on your phone, there's so many different apps you can do on your phone, even for astronomical purposes, like a Sunseeker app or one of those, you can do.
We actually did it while we were on the site, Dennis. I have an app that is called Star Walk 2 or something like that, and it literally it shows you all the constellations and stuff, and it was amazing using that in line with all of the stones. It was so.
Isn't that cool?
So
you can do it. You can do it yourself and prove it to yourself if you want. By bringing that. That is pretty cool. You did that. And anybody can do that. As long as they learn how to use it. It's pretty cool. I know our surveyor. I saw him again, the one that was there in the 70s. He visited us about a year and a half ago, and I even talked to him on the phone by emails. He's supposed to come back and look at some of the serpentine walls, because back when he did it back in the 70s, they were all in the brush. You couldn't see them. And he just went to points, different points, and, on the walls where the wall will bend or where the standing monolith is and that kind of stuff, Very, very accurate measurements he did. But connecting the dots and seeing that some of these walls will undulate vertically or horizontally, they have a head, body, and tail. He's like, oh my God, we didn't see that. I said, well, part of it's still all hidden in the brush for one thing. When you're looking at monoliths, you're looking where a wall takes a sudden turn, or where a wall ends or begins, But we got 13 serpentine walls up there, and one up to 2,550 feet. He goes, GPS is kind of replacing my field that I went in, in his dad's field of surveyor, the engineering. He goes, this is being replaced because people can do a GPS now and with LiDAR, and it's, because we're almost becoming obsolete, but because they still use surveyors, because it's going down that road now,
everything's getting so much more technical, and it's tough for them too, for sure.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so all this new technology. So, but on this project of the OSL, we did use the LiDAR, and Tom already did the 15 acres, and then when you were there, Doria brought out her GPR, and unfortunately I couldn't spend the whole time with her. I believe she brought out 2 different antennas, wavelengths. She was measuring the roof of the oracle chamber where we were taking some of the samples from. And she has to process that data too, and she's going to send me the information. And that will give us a good idea of how that structure is constructed, and anything interesting, particularly how much dirt is on the roof of that and how the walls you can't see that are below the ground are shaped or built, Maybe there'll be something there that we want to excavate or look at a little closer too, that hasn't been touched yet,
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Seeing her do that was really cool, because they set all the flags and they set all of the stuff, and then she had that big, it almost looked like a go-kart in a sense, like a little, and, it was really cool. It was really cool.
Yeah,
So,
it is pretty.
How long? Oh,
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
How long does it usually take to process the data on like certain things like the cores or the GPI?
The GPR, I'm not sure. I don't think it takes as long as Tom, because he did 15 acres and she's doing a smaller area, but it's still a lot of data, So I'm hoping to hear back from her pretty soon, Unlike the cores, which I believe, will take closer to, oh gosh, it could take a year. And I think what they have to do is take those little, each of the holes, they put in like a little, I mentioned a little sensor in there, and the sensor measures the radioactivity. And they have a name of the sensor. They call it like the altimeter, I think. And they have 4 of them up there, in the holes. And they got to collect those to measure it against whatever, comes out of the testing, I guess kind of like a baseline thing, I guess, or I don't know the technical words, but, so we're talking almost a year for the OSL, but I think Doria's GPI, she's going to give me some information hopefully pretty soon. I'm in touch with her quite often. And then Tom is pretty much finishing up his 15 acres on us. He's doing some last minute stuff, and then we're going to go out and do a lecture probably at a nearer meeting whenever you can do them again, Everything's virtual now. We'll get together and we're going to do that, and he'll give all the technical stuff. I'll give all my, the knowledge I have about the site. We'll do it together, and he's going to blend his technology with Doria's, and I believe, again, that's the first time that's been done. So ground penetration radar scanning mixed with the LiDAR, and so you'll have above the ground and below the ground. It'll be 3D, and it'll be a Superman vision kind of thing.
That's amazing. That's X-ray vision, for sure.
That is so cool. Yeah, I think that's going to be. We'd love to do the whole 110 acres with LiDAR and radar, but it's especially with the radar, it's a much slower process. She had to flag everything. Where Tom can walk around and he has to work really hard, carrying that equipment around. I see him out there sweating on the 15 acres. It's a lot of work for him. It is a lot, and I give him so much credit. Oh. And Doria too, moving that looks like a lawnmower almost, all around over the rocks and the roots, and and have to flag it every 5 feet, and record everything. It's a lot of work to set that up,
Oh, for sure. So, like, out of the 110 acres, do you know exactly what's on all of these acres, or are you guys just still discovering?
Yeah, we're still discovering things, and we are doing another project. It's a forest management project, and we've been thinking about it for years. And the late Dr. David Stewart Smith told me, he died in 2016. He kept telling me over the last couple of years before he passed away that we should have a licensed forester. You should come down and you should thin your forest, because you'll be able to see so much more with the astronomical alignments. You'll be able to see the walls, because we hadn't even discovered the serpentine walls at that time, and they show up like a sore thumb once the trees are thinned out. But also other features out there. There's about 34 great. Most of them are pretty good sized slabs. These are quarried slabs that the ancient builders must have been going out on what at that time would have been a pretty bare hill. And they would go out there and they would work a fissure or crack in the bedrock, and they would separate it and raise these stones up, prop them up with a rounded field stone by the glaciers, and then they would start hammering the edges of the stone. We call it percussion flaking, a big stone hammer against the edge, and they were dressing the stone by, it was like napping an arrowhead, if you will, but on a big scale. And then, for some reason, they left about 34 of these stones, some of them up to 1,000 feet from the main site, and a lot of them downhill. For some reason, they walked away from this project, and we found the very first slab that we knew was quarried back in 1982. One of our staff members, and Dave was around at that time, and he told our staff, look for stones that might be slabs that have been raised up artificially, and maybe a stone stuck underneath it, and perhaps the edge of it might show like dimpling or like scalloping, where somebody had been striking it with a stone hammer. And this woman, Mary, she was one of our guides, worked in the building too, and she was up having a picnic lunch. At that time, it was kind of just out in the woods near the North Stone. She was out there peacefully by herself. Today, it's much more open because we thinned out the forest, but she was sitting there looking around her and said, gee, this stone looks kind of funny. She looked underneath it, and she looked at the edge of it. She realized that the stone looked like it had been propped up, and the edge of it looked like it was serrated or dimpled. And then she looked at it closer and said, oh, there's a stone stuck underneath it holding it up. She brought it to the attention of Dr. David Stewart Smith in 82, and he jumped right on that and showed some other, members of the New England Antiquities and other people the stone and said, I think we have a candidate here of an ancient quarried slab still in its original socket. And so the next year in '83, they did an excavation along the edge, the leading edge of it, where the hammering would have taken place, and they found several inches underneath the soil all the little flakes of stone that had been knocked off it on top of the bedrock, So we, there it was. There was one of our, and he brought in Dr. Gary Hume, the state archaeologist. Dr. Gary Hume is still alive. He's retired now. He worked for the state of New Hampshire. He was kind of mainstream, but he was kind enough to come down and open his mind up a little bit. And he said, you know what? This is unmistakable. This big slab was shaped as though it was a 1.5-ton barrelhead. And it's Stone Age technology, not something that's Middle Age and like the Paddy family kind of stuff, that era.
Right, so it goes back quite a bit.
Yeah, back to the Stone Age, whatever that is. But we found 34 of these, and some of these are pretty huge. I mean, several tons that have been raised. We call them lazy stones. They call it that in Europe, too. It's a stone that's been raised up, maybe being shaped, but never transported to its final position in a chamber, perhaps, like a root slab. So for some reason, and we found most of these actually just in the last few years, we might have had maybe about 10 or 15, now we have 34. It kind of dawned on us about a year or two that we might be looking at a culture that was going to had a much grander plan for the site. We were a bigger construction plan, and for some reason, they abandoned the whole thing. Because for many years, we thought maybe the site was built. It could have been built over several generations of people, maybe by different people, but it might have been complete, and then it fell, to a state of ruins over centuries and centuries, falling apart, and the Paddy family came along in the late 1700s. But now it appears that they had a bigger plan for building this thing, and then they walked away from it. So, okay, what happened there,
Yeah.
Was it disease? Was it some climatic, change? Was it warfare? Was it something economic? Somebody suggested that if these were old world people, that when the Bronze Age ended and the Iron Age began, there was no longer a need for getting copper over here and bringing it back to the old world. The copper really would have come out of the Great Lakes area, some of the most pure copper in the world, in Lake Superior area, the greater area.
Oh, yeah,
but
absolutely.
And our site may have been just one of the sites that they initially, settled, coming in here to get the copper. They probably would have known this information from Native Americans, and Native Americans would have been exchanging copper from tribe to tribe. So it's a theory, it's one of those interesting theories. But when the Iron Age began, the market on copper and tin would have fallen, and it was actually worth more than gold at one time. The Bronze Age, all that tin and copper mixed together to make bronze. But everywhere in the world is pretty much iron, so you don't need to travel over the ocean to go get iron. It's everywhere, bog iron and everything. So maybe the market fell, and our site was eventually abandoned for that. It's just one of those things you can't really prove. It's interesting.
It's a thought. It's a thought for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worth considering, but I mean, how do you prove that? I'm not sure. Unless we have more accurate dates of when the site was abandoned, and it coincides with the Iron Age, that would be like, that's kind of interesting.
Right. So there's still so much space to cover out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and and it's so exciting to just have been a part of Friday. It was amazing, because who knows what those results will return. That's a huge day in America's Stonehenge's history. And
right.
New Hampshire's history, the country's history.
Yeah. Well,
awesome.
like you, I'm kind of anxious. Will the samples, be adequate? Will they be not contaminated? And then, what will the results? Will they kind of agree with the carbon dating and the astronomical data, as well as the coring, the ancient coring techniques using hammerstones, stuff like that? Will they agree with that, or will it be older, or will it be, more recent? So it's like one of those questions. And and then how do you analyze all of that and all that data from all the other techniques, if it agrees or disagrees with it, it's like, wow. So those things are keeping me awake a little bit at night too, but I guess I got about a year to think about that.
It's because you're so excited. That's why.
You're right, yeah.
Absolutely, man. And like I said, that's that passion showing out in you. And it really is exciting. And I didn't really expect to have results yet. So it was like, all right, we'll see what happens. It'd be cool, but so just quick question, real quick. Now,
Sure.
on the site, there is a stone that lines up with Stonehenge, the actual Stonehenge.
Yeah, that is the summer solstice sunrise stone, and it like a lot of the astronomical alignment foresights. So when you have an alignment, you have to have a back sight, the point near you, some sort of a reference, like a stone perhaps standing or something like that. And then you look in the distance, you see the foresight. So it's just like a gun sight. And then what you look at beyond that is usually the sun, moon, or star, rising or setting. But on that particular stone, we had the astronomical platform, which there were two columns here until Mr. Goodwin unfortunately thought that they were just a pile of stones, with no purpose. He photographed them and he diagrammed them and he wrote about them in his book called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England in 1946. And that came out, 7 years after he began his work. But we have a tripod with a hoist on it, and he's lifting up stones from that back around 1937, destroying those two cairns. Cairns are just basically piles of rocks. They can be pretty sophisticated, or they can just be a pile of rocks. In this case, he thought they were beehive chambers connected to the oracle chamber. They were not. So I think in that disappointment, he just said, well, they must be just wasted stone just thrown there. So he used them for reconstruction purposes of the ramp near the sacrificial table. We got pictures of the hoist lifting up rocks, and a hand crank lifting rocks. He destroyed it, and it was 40 years later. In the 1970s, we realized that the astronomical center was those two cairns. They marked the astronomical center. But the summer solstice sunrise is not only that, one of the cairns, because they worked off every alignment, 51 alignments worked off those 2 points. And if you go down towards the summer solstice halfway, there's an oval-shaped circle, a kind of an elliptical-shaped stone circle, with a stone in the center, and that was discovered in the 1970s. You stand in the center of that, you look at that stone, the summer solstice, and you notice that it doesn't have a point in the middle like an arrowhead. The point's off to the left, and it's asymmetrical, and it has kind of a slope. And you're like, why did they design it like that when the other ones look like arrowheads? When we finally cleared the trees out in 1970, I think 73, 74, to the horizon, we looked, and out there in the horizon we could see two hills, and the hills were shaped in that same shape of the notch. But what they did is they took and they quarried this slab, they stood it up, and they actually shaped the stone to fit into the notch, which is about 4 miles distance. So you have the astronomical platform I mentioned where the cairns were. You have the oval with the stone in the middle that you stood at, and then you had the standing stone, which has an asymmetrical top, and that fits right into the notch 4 miles distance. They actually fit into one another, and they found that is true of some sites in Europe. They call them a horizon feature. So this horizon feature we have at our site. And when the sun rises on June 21st or 20th, whatever, each year it's a little different, it actually rises 90 degrees to the top of that stone and the farthest horizon, and then it goes up and you get your sunrise. My son basically took that alignment from the astronomical platform through the stone circle, the stone, and then the horizon, and went across New England, and he just took it to see what was there, because we have other sites in New England, and see if any of the sites he knew about might align with that. But there's not too much in Maine, actually. There are a few chambers, but not like Vermont, and the rest of New England is loaded, in New York, too. Maine seems to, we keep finding them in Maine. Maybe there's a lot more we haven't discovered. Maine doesn't have too many chambers or structures or anything like that. But it took that line right past Nova Scotia, and it goes right across the Atlantic. Just for kicks, he took it to the other side into Europe, and it came down in southern England. And he kept changing, he used Google Earth, and he just kept changing the scale. And this was in 2012 while he was in college. It was he had a break in college. It was, I think it was in the spring, I think he found it, during the spring break. And what he found out, he's been to Stonehenge a few times, and he changed the scale, and he noticed it was in the Salisbury Plain where Stonehenge is, and as he kept changing the scale, all of a sudden Stonehenge appeared, and as he blew it up, Stonehenge not only appeared, but the line went right through one of the large trilithons of Stonehenge, and I was like, oh my God, isn't that amazing? It could be a coincidence, probably a coincidence, maybe, but it's amazing. We've been looking at the stone since the 1970s. We never realized that if you had, like Superman vision, if you could follow that line, across the globe. It would go right through the center of Stonehenge. That's kind of weird, you know.
And I mean, again, how many coincidences do you need? You know?
Well, the sun shivers up my back, and then that became near the New England Antiquities happened. Just after that, come in for a meeting at our place, you know, like a field trip. And I was showing it to some of the members, and one of the members actually, his friend was Scott Walters. And Scott was on a show just starting out called America on Earth on History Channel. And Scott got right on talked to the producers from the film company that's out there that does the show. And they made ours one of the priorities to come out and film that. And plus the rest of the things we've been talking about, except we didn't know about the serpentine walls back then and some other features, but they did a whole show about that. Well, since then, we've taken some of the other alignments, like True South goes through actually a serpentine wall, actually, from the Astronomical platform. It goes through Machu Picchu down in Peru.
Oh, man.
It's just pretty cool, you know. So that could be a coincidence, too. I mean, I know archaeologists love the word coincidence.
Right,
right. They do really like that, yeah. But if you go in the southwest winter solstice sunset, which is that very first one we saw in 1970, that line, if you extend it, goes into Mexico, goes to Teotihuacan, which I've been to. It goes to the moon pyramid. You know, they have the sun pyramid, the moon pyramid, and then the Quetzalcoatl pyramid. But anyway, I've been there with my dad, and that goes right through the moon pyramid. So that's the winter solstice sunset. The equinox sunset goes through Pueblo Bonito at Chaco Canyon. We were there just about a year ago right now. And standing at Pueblo Bonito going along that line coming right through me right now, you know, from the equinox.
That's such a cool experience, too. But that's what I'm saying, Dennis. Is what are the odds? You know, that like, and a lot of those places sit on, I don't know if you know anything about the ley lines, but sit on ley lines. And it's just an amazing coincidence, if it is a coincidence, that you guys would be sitting right aligned with everything else. You know, what are the odds?
What are the odds? And no, you're right. We do kind of consider the ley line. My dad actually has Alfred Watkins' book in our library, too. I found that this year, and it's like 1927, I think. And he was a guy that had the old straight track and kind of started the ley line idea in England. But so that's exciting to us. I mean, what I can tell you is if you look here, and if you had great vision, you could see, they're all like World Heritage sites, they're like UNESCO World Heritage sites, very important sites. And the other one, too, is the equinox sunrise, and that goes through the Canary Islands, and I didn't realize that they have pyramids there, and it goes right through the pyramids in the Canary Islands, and I may have an opportunity to get there next year. I've been to Spain, but I've never been to Canary Islands, but if I go to Canary, I'm going to hop over to Spain, and then see some of the megaliths in Spain, because I've been there, but we saw medieval stuff. That's pretty cool. They have some of the most amazing megalithic structures in Spain and part of Portugal, too. And one other alignment, the last one that I know about right now is the August 1st sunrise. It's a cross quarter days. It's one of the 51 alignments we have at the site. So they have the quarter days, which are the 4 seasons, and the cross quarter days, the days in between. And that August 1st sunrise, and I got to do a little bit more work on this, and I tried it like about half a dozen times. It ends up on the Giza Plateau with the Great Pyramid. So, it's kind of a surprise, too. I'm like, wow. So I had to check it several times to make sure I made no errors in it. You don't want to embarrass yourself,
Well, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. So, like you said, a lot of people want to dismiss it, and it's a lot of the times there's no coincidence, with these ancient sites,
Exactly. Yeah.
So how would you say that this site compares to other sites around the globe? Like, obviously, we're just getting into it, but like we said earlier, a lot of the times, like with the lintels and everything else, they compare to certain cultures from around the world, really.
It really looks Western megalithic, I think. Again, Native Americans were all around the site. We actually found, like I say, the pottery. We found a wigwam site near Apakaman, that dated about 2,000 years old. But it has a Western megalithic feel to it. The East-West Chamber, to me, I saw this in 1976 looking at a Time Life book about megalithic sites in Europe. And again, the number about 50,000. They keep finding more of them, too, in different areas. I think the Spanish one was the most recent. They call it the Spanish Stonehenge because of a drought. I think a lake dried up, and this is beautiful. I think they were kind of aware of it because when they flooded it, years and years ago, I think they knew it was there, but now it's like exposed, and they can use the latest technology on it. But our site looks like that. So the east-west chamber looks like the galley graves, or what they call gallery or galley graves. So they're in northwest Ireland, and I've been to Ireland, but I didn't get to that part of Ireland. They're in Holland, and they call them the Giant's Bed, and they're in France. And when I went to Karnak, I saw a couple in Karnak, and they always run true east-west, 20 to 60 feet in length, and they were used as tombs from our best knowledge today. And one of my friends, who's a book writer and a member of the era, he was over in Holland last year, and he was looking at one of the Giants, but I was on Messenger with him. I said, okay, what's the orientation? He goes, it's true east-west. I said, that's just like our east-west chamber. And our east-west chamber fits within, the parameters, the size, the shape, and the orientation. Unfortunately, Mr. Goodwin back in the 1930s didn't have all the technology nor all the methodology that we use today. And when he cleaned out the dirt in these chambers, he may have been destroying some valuable information or data, because if they were burials, the bones could be gone today, but the soil would contain some of the chemicals, possibly like potassium and calcium and some other things. So you would take some of the dirt, send it into a laboratory, and say, okay, what's it? What is in this? And that might give you information. In fact, it was a burial chamber. Next to the east-west chamber is the V hut, like the letter V is in Victor, and it's the only chamber up there really not orientated north, south, east, and west. True. It's southwest facing, kind of towards the winter solstice, sunset. And we always knew that. And in the 70s, when I became aware of some of the Western European different styles of construction, we became aware of the wedge tombs of Ireland. And my dad and I went over there to Ireland and spent a week going all over Ireland looking at some of the 2,000 megalithic sites. I think we saw a few dozen. We didn't see all 2,000, but you can spend a lifetime there, I guess, looking at them. But we did go and look for some in particular, like the wedge tombs, and they're always facing southwest. And we found a couple of them that were like the size, the shape, and the orientation, again, of V hut. And over there, they were used, from our best knowledge, were used as tombs. And in Spain, I saw one that looked even closer, because it not only looked like our chamber, but it had the same notch on the roof, like a little half a moon notch carved into the roof slab like ours. And in front of it, on the left side, on the bedrock, we have a basin, like a cutout in the bedrock. And then when Spain had the same place, it was about maybe a third the size of our basin, but in the same spot. And to the right of the chamber, there's like these stones that look like at one time they may have been used as like to block the structure. Maybe you put the body in there or whatever remains, and then you would enclose it with these stones. And our structure has the same stones to the right. They could have been moved there, by, maybe the Patties could have put them there, but they've always been there to our best knowledge. But it looked just like what you'd see in Spain.
They're pretty big. They're pretty big stones, Dennis.
Yeah.
We actually, one of our guys took a picture with them, and just for perspective, it was definitely over 6 foot, 6 foot tall for sure.
That's pretty cool. So I think there's a megalithic feel. In the megalithic sites, they go right through, into Russia. The Ural Mountains have about 3,500 of them, and there's the Ural Mountain Megaliths, the website. And one of the structures that pops up right away looks like one of the chambers that's in Windham, New Hampshire. I mean, the style of it, the different features of it. And when I show it to people, I have both pictures on my phone. I did screenshot. I show it to them, and they say, well, it's the same structure. I said, well, no, this one's in Windham, New Hampshire, and according to authorities, it's supposed to be a root cellar from 200 years ago. And they, well, where's that one from? I said, well, that one's about 7,000 miles away in the Ural Mountains, and they consider that megalithic and ancient Stone Age structure. And they said, they look like the same structure, I mean, if you look at the details of it, you say, oh, no, it's the same structure, the roof, the lintel, the stone in front that looks like there's a blocking stone, the walls, everything. The one in Windham, I believe, is I think it faces, I'm going to say true south, I think. I don't know what the one in the Ural Mountains, but there are 3,500 chambers over there in Europe. They go into China, India, South Korea had about 100,000 of these. It's funny, Mr. Goodwin back in the 1930s and 40s, and when he was doing all this investigation, he wrote the 4 books. The one that was about our site in particular was called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England, as I mentioned. And he mentions structures in different places of the world, including South Korea. And we only found that out about 10 years ago from a businessman that had just been over there. He goes, there are megalithic sites in South Korea. And I said, I had no idea. And they have amazing, and they may have been almost 100,000 of them. And they take good care of them over there from what I can see. They make them like parks. They protect them. They really they really kind of care and protect these structures in South Korea, from what I can see, But they're also in Australia, and the most recent I found is in New Zealand has megalithic sites. And I did a radio show out of there with a host, and he never mentioned any megalithic sites in his country. And I think it's something fairly new then. Maybe he didn't know at the time. But South America has them too. So they're on 6 continents out of 7 continents, megalithic sites.
And you have one right in your backyard.
We got one right in my backyard, literally, yes.
That's so amazing. Dennis, tell me about the sunrise. Remember when you were showing me the video on Friday about the sunrise? It was coming up over a stone inside the watch house.
Right, yeah.
What do you think that is?
Bringing that up, yeah. We saw that 6 months ago on the spring equinox. That structure is the head of the longest serpentine wall, we believe, and it wraps itself around 2,550 feet. Because back in front of the watch house, one more hump and then a pointed tail. And I think I showed you the LiDAR image of the watch house, how it looks like a serpent, as we were talking a little bit earlier.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, so this stone is a quartzite stone. It's in the back wall. And people have been talking about it for many, many decades, going, I wonder if that stone was placed there, because it's different than the rest of the stones. It's very obvious. It's a very, very kind of whitish color to it, and it is quartzite. So I had a friend up from Texas named Haley. She was up a year and a half ago, and she had a Sunseeker app on her phone, and she knew how to use it pretty good. And she was taking astronomy and astrophysics in college and everything down in Texas. So she had it out, and I said, what do you think? She looked at it, and I said, I think it might be winter solstice because of the angle, but, the trees are in the way and everything. But she pulled it out. She went into the chamber and, spent a few minutes orientating her phone with this app. She goes, it looks like it's spring or fall equinox sunrise. It'll be in the morning, sometime maybe around 9 o'clock-ish. Like, wow, okay. So we have been doing that forest management thing, and fortunately, before they pulled out in February, because the ground got soft, they haven't finished the project yet, they just cleared in front of it some of the trees there. And it was wonderful because it opened it up to almost where you could see the sun rise. You could never see that before, at least in our time. So on the spring equinox, a bunch of us gathered up there. We had cameras. My daughter-in-law set up some cameras and everything. We were inside the chamber, and we kind of waited patiently for the sunrise. And as it did, we thought the sun would just glow in the sunlight. It would be just kind of very bright. But what really happened was the shape of the entrance of the chamber created a shadow and light effect. And so as the sun rose over 30 minutes, around just after 8 o'clock, it actually framed it. For several minutes, the shadow and light framed the shape of that stone. And I showed you that on my phone, I think.
Oh, yeah, we've seen it. All of us did. You showed all of us. And it was pretty amazing to see that happen. And I think you even had it in kind of like slow motion. And it was perfect over the stone. There was no denying it. The quartzite stone was there. And it was amazing, dude.
Wasn't that so cool? Yeah, it just framed it, So they had to put some time into that. I don't know how they would have made sure. They must have, I don't know if it was trial and error or what, but they made that entranceway, a certain shape, and then as the sunlight goes into it, because it will shadow it and light it and everything, and it just frames the shape as you saw. And at the end of that 30 minutes, because we had a time lapse on it, about a 30-second YouTube video, it looks like a pointer pointing back at that stone. And it reminds me of Chaco Canyon, with a sun dagger, that you can Google too. In a way, although those are kind of petroglyphs that are being illuminated, ours is a stone. It could be considered an egg, and it's considered by many ancient people the sun was a god. The rays would come down and fertilize the egg, and the Mother Earth, in the womb is kind of the interior of the watch house, and it's kind of like Newgrange in Ireland, but that's winter solstice. Newport Tower in Rhode Island has an egg shape in one of the arches, and the sunlight on the winter solstice at 9 o'clock, like Newgrange, will go in there, and it illuminates the egg, again, probably fertilization. And there are a couple caves in Colorado, one called the Pathfinder, one called the Crack Creek, and then there's the Sun Temple, which is also in the western part of Colorado, I think, Mojave North in California, and Anubis Cave in Oklahoma. These are all different sites that aren't well known to the public, and in some cases it's kind of good because of vandalism, But we have pictures of people, a lot of researchers out there over the last couple of decades filming the same thing that we did this spring. And particularly on the equinox, so the ones I just mentioned, except for Newgrange and the Newport Tower, those are winter solstice, they're all equinox and all tied into a serpent, petroglyph. So on the equinox, spring and fall, the sunrise, in the morning, the sun will go into those structures and illuminate like a pointer right across the serpent carvings. Ours doesn't have a carving, but it is the head of a serpent, and it is an equinox. And one other one would be down at Chichen Itza down in Mexico, which I've been to, and on the equinox, if you're there, you can watch the serpent go down the staircase on the equinox. And so there's a serpent equinox tie-in in different cultures, and that illumination and shadow light effect and a pointer, kind of like a finger pointer or a dagger, we have that at our site, and those other ones do too. So what I like to do is take pictures of all of these and put them together, so people can see this and see the comparisons, And again, not coincidence, I don't think.
I don't think so either, Dennis. And it's so strange that it's just all coming. It's coming together for you, man. It's all there. We just it's tough that you guys get any nonsense your way about this site. It's such an amazing place to be.
And it's so nice that the four of you joined us, on Friday, to be a part of that. And it's like a picture's worth a million words, or 1,000 words, because when you were there the other day, I could be talking with you right now and you'd be trying to imagine what I'm talking about. But the listeners can also go to our website, and on the website, StonehengeUSA.com, you can actually download an app, and you can do a complete tour of our site. And it can be used actually at our site, or you can do it in your lazy boy, at home or on the couch.
Right.
And you can do kind of cool. And some of the things that you and I have been talking about will be added to that eventually, like that illumination on the equinox. My daughter-in-law right now is out on maternity leave as we were talking. But some of these things are going to be added to that. We'll keep, making improvements, adding new things that we find,
Absolutely. Keep adding it on and keep showcasing it, because it's so amazing, and certain things like that match up around the globe are just, it can't be coincidence,
Yeah, it's coming to light, like you said, and just spreading the information to people, making people aware of that, So many people don't even know what our place is, even locally, We get people from Salem, just down the street, and you're like, and I think COVID-19, it's not a good disease at all, but one of the things that might be a positive is people are starting to come to see a place like ours, stay vacation or whatever they call it. They're coming a little closer, and they're like, wow, I never knew this place was here. And I said, well, we've been here since 1958. And they said, oh my God, I've been going by here for 30, 40 years, and they've never stopped. And now they bring their family. So that's kind of nice, We are getting people from out of town. We're not getting any Europeans right now or Canadians right now because of what's going on, but we are getting more local people from New Hampshire, New England, and the Northeast, and really nice people. And they once they see it, they all of a sudden get this interest in this thing. It's like they never had. They didn't know it existed within them. I guess like, well, this is pretty cool. This mystery, astronomy, an ancient site, perhaps an ancient civilization that built it.
And it's all wrapped. It's all wrapped into one, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing for me too, because that was my third trip out there, and like every time it was better every time, and to learn more about the astronomy and to learn about the alignments has just been amazing. It's on such a bigger scale, it's not little to me. And a lot of people that the 4 people or 3 people that I brought with me were blown away.
Oh, that's great. They were great guys too. I really enjoyed talking to all of you, and I think it's a little bit. There's more to this site. I think maybe technology will reveal a few things, to us that, there was even a satellite that was sent up. It's called the World View 3 satellite. I think it was sent up in 2014, and the lady, she's from Alabama, in Birmingham. And I've done a couple radio shows out of a woman down there, a very nice lady. She does state radio and everything, and she actually is right where this woman is. And actually, Tom with LiDAR has spoken to this woman, and her name is Sarah Pocket. They call her a space archaeologist because her satellite has found the site up at Canada, the second Viking settlement in Point Rosy, about 400 miles southwest of Lonzo Meadow, the very first Viking site, was found in 1960, and that answered the question, was anybody here before Columbus from Europe, or from the Old World? And because before that, people would be debating the Vikings coming over, whether it was just myth or whether it was legend, and it really happened. But her satellite recently found at Point Rosy, and they did a 2-hour PBS special about that. She found, and I think LiDAR and her equipment found 60,000 more Guatemalan ruins that are Mayan recently, and I think 19 more pyramids in Egypt. So I think they're up to 139 pyramids now. So we're hoping she can aim her satellite. She must have probably a backlog of stuff going for years, down the road that people want to use her. So we can get her to look down into the New England area or the Northeast, actually, to see, if there's some interesting features that should be examined on foot, by archaeologists and our researchers. Somewhere they're going to find more of these structures. Some of them will be, because even that Viking site was kind of buried, so they can see into the ground a bit, disturbances and features that just don't look natural. So
yeah, I know they were discovering things. What were they? More Mexican, not Mexican, but South American settlements, like near the Mayan ruins. Like they had found new Mayan ruins, like I think 150 yards from like Tiwanaku or something like that. Like, using LiDAR and stuff like that. It's cool. It's yeah.
And I think her equipment too, and LiDAR there, and then that World View 3 satellite. And I think in the Amazon jungle, they are starting to realize that there was a civilization that was quite large compared to what people thought, because they thought the jungle couldn't support any massive size of people. They're finding causeways, they're finding great big mounds where the villages were built, and also mounding for agriculture and canal systems. And it was kind of that, like the City of Z. I read that book. How 100 years ago, I think Percy, what's his name? Percy, I got the book actually. And the City of Z was made into a movie, and it was about the legendary cities that were in the Amazon jungle. And people thought, well, no, that's all just fantasy, that's myth. But it they really were. So some of the early explorers from Europe actually came upon them. But I think the Z's might have wiped out the native, and very shortly thereafter, these things were covered with thick jungle. And all you heard was legends. And people said, it was just a bunch of legends. These cities and the population was never there. But they actually modified, part of the Amazon. It wasn't, all natural. A lot of it had been, with mounds and causeways and all sorts of canals and everything. It was actually changed. So we'd love to see that kind of equipment used up here, too, to look at what we have, and New York, right through New England, to see what else we got. And it goes into Quebec, Canada, too,
Oh yeah, and it's so diverse. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, while I have you, Dennis, so in our emails we had talked about how we have 35,000 hours of flight time, right? Flying, I believe.
Yeah, I got about 30,000. Yeah, but closer. Yeah.
I'm sure it felt like 35,000.
It feels like 35.
In any of your flights, have you had any out of the ordinary experiences as a pilot, in terms of, or even heard any of certain out of the ordinary experiences as a pilot, like UFOs?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of night flying back in the 80s on the 727. I was in the UPS system flying out of Louisville, and it was all night flying, a week on, a week off, and a lot of the guys I flew with were, Korean and Vietnam pilots too, and we talk about some of these things. Some of the pilots had interest in it, and others didn't, weren't interested. But some of the ones that were interested saw things, in their military career too that weren't really explainable. At night we'd be flying along and we'd see things, sometimes mistaken like Venus, or another star, or maybe a landing light on a plane, 100 miles away. But the problem was we never had anything that was close encounter, but we saw things out there, and sometimes it would just disappear. I'm like, what the hell was that? I don't know. And then you wouldn't see it. It might even ask the controller, do you have a target at 12 o'clock, maybe 50 to 100 miles out there or something, because at night there's not as much aircraft, particularly back in the 80s. Now the skies are getting more crowded, or at least they were. But my things I saw were actually in a car two times. One back around 66 with my dad and a friend, and we were up at one of the archaeologists' camps on a lake, and we were returning at night. My sister, too, and Mom. So we're all in the station wagon. We're riding back, and in New Hampshire, we saw something very bright, brighter than Venus, to compare it to. And as we went around the outer belt, 293 around Manchester, we saw this thing. And as you go around it, we saw it from one side. As we went around, we saw it from like the southern look. So in other words, we saw it as we looked to the southeast, and as we went around Manchester, the thing was in the east, and then as we went further, it was to the northeast. So it wasn't something like a star. And we were very curious. We don't know what we saw. It was at nighttime. But the next day on the radio station, it was being talked about. So I think we saw a UFO because people saw it around the city.
That's
now,
so cool.
last year in Kingston, New Hampshire, and that's where Betty Hill's from, The Interrupted Journey. That's where she grew up. And she lived in Portsmouth, but she was born in Kingston. And Bonnie and Betty Hill, a 1961 abduction. It's so famous.
It's amazing. I was trying to get to the site while we were out there, but I think it's like an hour and a half from where.
Yeah, it's in the White Mountains where it happened, coming back from Montreal, And so Bonnie and Betty, he died in 69, and we met her in 1974. She came to our museum, actually to meet Hans Holzer and a couple of his guests. And then she became a lifetime friend of my mom's, But we were going through that town last year after we got we ate over in Kingston, and we got ice cream. My wife and I by ourselves in the car going through it was Route 111 going across Route 125, and it's a kind of a busy intersection with red lights and everything. As we went through, we looked to the right, to the north, and I saw something in the sky. My wife saw it at the same time, and I said, "Oh my God, that looks like a." I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but I was thinking it was a KC-135, which actually they've been replaced. Those are the refueling tankers, are basically a 707 Boeing, right. The military has. But it was very dark in color. It was more angular, and it looked like if you could say it had a nose on it, the whole thing is tipped down towards the ground. And my wife really isn't a big, she's not really big on UFOs. She kind of snickers at me a little bit. I don't think she totally doubts them, but she's never seen one, And she just kept looking at it. And then we went to the intersection. We could not stop, because it was too busy and it was, green light. And we kept going, hoping to see a break in the woods. There's all woods along there. And we never got a break for about maybe 5 minutes. We considered turning around and going back and looking at it again, which maybe we should have, And I would say I know aircraft pretty well. I flew for 42 years, and I've never seen anything like that. The only thing that came to mind, maybe I was looking at some sort of a advertising blimp, but it's like kind of a black gray color. And my wife goes, "Yeah, no, that's not what." She had a better look at it than I did because she was a passenger. It was on her side, she could stare at it longer than I could. And I would say I got a friend from down in your area. She's from Westchester, New York originally. She lives in Connecticut, and she saw something that sounded just like what I saw. And she reported it to MUFON, and she's waiting for them to, kind of look at it and everything else. But I think we might have saw something quite similar. Now, if it was something that we made and it's up there, or a blimp or something, although my wife said it wasn't that, that's explainable, But what I saw, it really kind of sent shivers up my back because I see aircraft all the time, over the years I flew. And,
so Dennis, what is it about New Hampshire?
Yeah, it's kind of because the incident at Exeter, New Hampshire, in 1965, gets confused with Bonnie and Betty Hill's, story.
Which one is that?
Yeah, the incident at Exeter happened in 65, and it was a gentleman who was hitchhiking coming up to Kensington, New Hampshire. Kensington, New Hampshire, by the way, is a little town that is where, if you may remember, the Lockerbie Pan Am terrorist over Scotland.
Yes.
The captain of that comes from that little town. That's what it's noted for. It's a nice little town in New Hampshire. But this hitchhiker back in 65, I guess, was going up, and he saw something, I guess. And I was on a radio show with a gentleman from out in Washington, and he actually is from New Hampshire. And he actually was very articulate in the whole story because he interviewed the guy. But this became, I think John Fuller wrote about Bonnie and Betty Hill, and John Fuller wrote about the incident at Exeter and about this gentleman. He gets to a police station eventually. I think somebody picked him up and he was totally shaken, so they brought him to the police station, if I recall, and maybe some of your listeners can correct the story. The police eventually went out to look back, took him back, and I think there was another woman, by the way, that was parked on a little island on the road, like a little grass island she shouldn't have been parked on. And I think the police found her kind of historical around the same time, and she saw the same thing. And the police got back there, and they're looking, they don't see anything. All of a sudden, there it is. And the police are all flipped out. And Pease Air Force Base was a SAC base at the time, and it's very close to that. And I mentioned I thought that's where that KC-135, actually they had B-52 and F-111s there. It was a nuclear, it was a SAC nuclear base, and I flew with a lot of the guys in the airlines that retired from there. And, but they got involved with it too, because it's so close to a nuclear installation, back in 65, it was still active. So it became a real big event. And again, a lot of people confuse the incident at Exeter with Bonnie and Benny Hill because Bonnie, they were right there. Those towns were all together. But they're two separate incidents. They have 4 years apart.
And they didn't. They didn't come out public with it at first, right? The Hills. Yeah. They
did not.
They actually.
They didn't want it. They didn't want people talking about it. They kept it pretty quiet, but they had nightmares. They eventually went under, I guess, hypnosis, and I think that there was a famous psychologist from Boston, the name escapes me, but he put them under that separately, and they came up with the same stories over the course of, I forget how long, it was quite a while of having them interviewed, The psychologist interviewed them separately, for quite a while. Not just one day, but many, I think over the course of a couple of years. But Bonnie and Betty Hill really didn't want to discuss it. I think they might have been kind of embarrassed by it. They were very bothered by it. And Betty's dress had some sort of markings on it. She kept the dress. And the Chevrolet had shiny spots, I believe, on the trunk. And there was something about their dog, too. The dog had some issues, too. I forget what that was. Bonnie died in 69. Some people say, well, maybe he got, too much radiation. But I don't know if it's speculation or not. But he died in 69 from cancer. But Betty just died, I think in 2003. And her niece, Kathleen Martin, she's been to our site, like Betty. And I met Travis Walton from the 1975,
that's the Arizona one, right?
Yeah, that's really and Travis is a really sharp guy, and he came to our museum. I've met him a couple times, and a real gentleman, a really nice guy, very, very smart, and he's so sincere. So whatever happened, you're looking at somebody and just like, wow, this guy.
Well, coupled with your own experiences, it's hard to not believe someone,
Yeah.
Especially if you've had unexplained experiences.
Yeah, I myself have kind of come to the idea that the universe is probably full of life, and I just heard in our own galaxy there might be 60 billion planets that are Goldilocks, 60 billion planets. And even only if a small percentage, like 1%, had life that was more intelligent, more advanced than ours, it's still like 500,000 planets. It's like 600,000 planets with, I think I did the math correctly, that would have, that have more technology than us. And what does that mean? I don't know. They say future technology will look like magic, Probably they have the ability, to reach us. But that's just, one of the statistics that are out there now. That probably life is throughout the universe,
Yeah, it's such a time to be alive, Dennis.
Things are happening quickly.
It is.
You saw where they think there's some life on Mars. Very, this gas that's there. The name of it.
Venus. Are you talking about the Venus?
Venus. Yeah, today that it's preliminary. It's kind of preliminary, but maybe it's a sign that there's some sort of primitive, life or something on Mars, at least in the atmosphere.
Yeah, they said it's one of their main indicators of life. Usually is the I think it's phosphor or something like that.
Yeah, it smells like a skunk or something, but the gas does. But that was today's news, and then one of my friends, from Texas sent me a clip on that, and I had already saw it popped up my phone like 3 times, and I go, "What is that?" And it's, Venus might have life on it, at least in the atmosphere. I'm like, it's always something every day, and again, they keep finding ancient sites around the world, and they keep finding that a lot of them are quite sophisticated. Our site, if you draw points between the walls, and I have all the diagrams. My dad made up some, and other people did it. He did some just recently in the last 10 years, just before he died, and others were made in the 1970s. There's a geometry to our site, too, equilateral, isosceles, and Pythagorean triangle. And this is found at some of the stone circles over in Scotland, for instance, too, some of the 800 stone circles that are over there. So there seems to be a mathematics and astronomy, engineering, and probably a standard unit of measure. And then again, like you say, there might be these lines, you refer to them as ley lines, connecting these sites together. But in any event, these people seem to be pretty brilliant, understanding mathematics way before Pythagoras,
Absolutely. Astronomy, all of it. Absolutely. It's
yeah.
And we don't give them as much credit as they should get,
Yeah. That's, you hit the nail on the head on that. They keep thinking everybody's so simple back then, not capable, It's very much looking down at these cultures, when you really look at the evidence they have, it's like, they're always surprised, like, oh, these people could do that, You sail around the world, build these magnificent structures like Stonehenge or the pyramids or any of the thousands and thousands of sites they're actually engineered, and laid out very, very carefully, and using mathematics. Dr. Tom in Scotland, we met him, and he's the father of archaeoastronomy, and we talked to him since the 1960s. We had supper with him in Scotland with his whole family in 1982, and then he passed away in 1983. And he was at the University of Glasgow, and he had a seat at Oxford University, and he helped develop the engineering department there. And I believe before he retired, they were constructing a brand new engineering building, and I think it's probably much bigger than it was back then, but his name's still over there. And he's the one that found the megalithic yard, which is 32.64 inches, and that's the standard unit of measure we're kind of looking at. And the way the stone circles and other structures were aligned with the 18.5-year lunar cycle, and the mathematics of these structures over there. They had egg shape and pear shape, and a couple of the stone circles are actually flat-sided. It looks like they understood pi because you can take the diameter and actually lay it on the flat-sided circle, and it will touch after 3 diameters will come around and will actually touch, so they had that concept, I think, of pi, and even phi, which is 1.618, the golden ratio. They seem to be aware of that at some of these sites too.
Yeah, so they weren't simple at all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what we used to think they were. Just a bunch of simpletons putting up. In fact, they said a lot of the stone circles. Some of them are perfectly circular in Wales and up in Scotland, and some again were kind of elliptical shaped. And when you found out is you use one foci, you have a perfect circle. 2 foci, you end up in an ellipse, and 3 foci, you can actually make like pear shapes. Different. He calls them an egg shapes. And he classifies them. And even that flat-sided circle. And so they were aware of the concept of the 3, 4, 5 triangle, for instance, or different, influence of that, or the isosceles or equilateral triangles. And he can demonstrate that not just a few times, but over those, about 800 stone circles, these things keep repeating themselves. So it's not a coincidence,
Oh, yeah, they absolutely knew what they were doing. There's no question they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah.
Well, Dennis, we're about 2 hours now, man. I appreciate your time.
Wow.
It went by quick. I had so much fun, man. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
So
you guys are great.
Yeah.
You guys are great. Yeah, I appreciate you guys coming out. The couple times you came out, and I hope you guys come back again.
Oh, we're definitely going to. I'm going to encourage all of my listeners to get out and check out America's Stonehenge. It is located in Salem, New Hampshire. Dennis, what's your website again?
Yeah, Edwin, it's StonehengeUSA.com. There's an email in there. There's a phone number if they want to give us a call. And the free app download is on that. And the 12-minute video in our theater, which is the theater's closed right now. They can watch an introductory film, and then we're on Facebook and also Instagram. So there's a number of ways to check out the site and also to contact us.
Okay. Do you also have a YouTube page?
Yeah, we do. You go on America's Stonehenge, and there's quite a few videos. We've done our own, and I think there's some produced by other people too. So, and I did go on there for a radio show one night. We were having some technical difficulties, and when I went in there are a few that we did that are not in there for some reason either, and we're going to find out why. But yeah, in America's Stonehenge, you go on YouTube to see some of the videos, and I think the one with the watch house illumination. I think, the latest one that will be on there too, which is pretty cool.
And it's amazing. Everybody should definitely check it out. It's so cool. I see it in person. Get out there, Dennis, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your invite last Friday, and I hope you get to enjoy your, did you say it was your granddaughter?
Yes, brand new granddaughter. Name is Juliet. Yeah, and I've only seen her once, so I'm gonna be over there tomorrow checking her out again. So, but thank you so much. I totally enjoyed having all of you visit us twice in the last month and a half, I think it was, and I totally enjoyed talking to you tonight. So thank you so much, and your listeners too.
Absolutely, we'll try to do it again soon. Thank you so much.
Have a good night now. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.